Hello, everyone. I hope you have had a week not filled with cold symptoms and that it's been awesome. And today I thought I would share with you how we come to certain decisions with the data migration because we tell you about all these issues we run into. And I just want to make sure that you understand that we are taking into account careful consideration of the impact of things. And I wanted to kind of walk you through how we are migrating the account and contacts and this issue we have been running into and trying to figure out ways around it and the easiest and clearest way to deal with it. And we just made a decision on this today as well. So I wanted to share with you a couple things about it. So first of all, we're trying to migrate about 51,000 account records just in Salesforce. We're not talking about SysPro. And we're trying to migrate at the same time about 45,000 contacts. Combined, that's about 96,000 records that we're trying to migrate and make sure all the information gets over to you in the same way that you see it today. And to give you some context, 96,000 records, or 96,000, is about the population of our good old Sandy, Utah, or one of our new branches, Branch 40. So take everyone in Sandy and try to place them somewhere else and keep everything that they have going on for them. And that's what we're trying to do. And the issue we're running into is that Salesforce assumes that every single contact and account, all of that is a B2B record. And so what that means is Salesforce has an account, and then it has a contact, and you can have another contact if you need to, as many as you want, but they all relate back to this account. And practically, that makes sense if we're talking about businesses and we're trying to track information like NewMotion. We can have NewMotion all as one account. We can talk about Sandy over here in OKC, and we can talk about Jim over here in Como. And we have records attached all through NewMotion. And so this is maybe the same brand ambassador, but they're dealing with a couple different contacts at different places, right? That makes sense. That's a B2B record. But where this breaks down is that most of our business isn't B2B. Most of our business is B2C. So when we try to translate a B2C record into a B2B format, we have the duplication that you all are familiar with, Lauren Pugh as the account and Lauren Pugh as the contact. And then sometimes there's another contact like the mom or whatever, Rufus as my contact, he's my cat, whatever, B2B. What's great and why we love the new system is it gets rid of that assumption. We no longer have to assume a B2B record. We can assume a B2C record, which means that we have just Lauren Pugh and not Lauren Pugh account, Lauren Pugh contact. But in order to do that, we're changing the way that the data is inherently structured. And so we have to programmatically or through code identify, hey, we make this rule, 95% of the records are covered, it's going to roll out like this. And so, we have to really put in time and thought on how do I identify if it's a B2B or a B2C record systematically. I can, of course, go and look at the 96,000 records, but who has time for that? And we're trying to get this done efficiently, right? What we now have is we have two assumptions we can start off with, where we're trying to tease down of our 96,000 records, which ones are B2B and which ones are B2C, right? So for a B2B record, we're assuming that structure of account, contact, like that NewMotion. Or maybe there's 3 contacts or maybe there's 1 contact. And we want to keep the structure for as many of our records as possible if it is appropriate. But then we also have our B2C assumption that we can make now, where we have the account is equal to the contact. You just have one record. There's no hierarchy or anything. This is the part that we're excited about, but the part that's been really difficult to translate or transform into the new system. And so what we're really asking is, how do we do this? So in order to programmatically translate this, we have to find somewhere in the data that's going to give us, let's say, 9 times out of 10, or we like to throw around the 80-20 rule, although 20% of our data being wrong isn't really acceptable. But 9 times out of 10 or whatever, we want to be able to identify this consistently that, hey, this is a B2C record because of this data point, and this is a B2B record because of this other data point. And so I have to look at what fields are available on the account. And If you're watching this video, you're probably familiar with the fields, so these are like basically the fields I had to choose from, right? We have the account name, the phone number on the account, fax, the type of account, the address, billing and shipping, and the location. Now, of these data points, if we think about, well, which one of these data points is most likely going to tell me what type of account we're looking at? And I kind of gave away the answer, right? But what we're trying to figure out if it's a B2B or B2C, we could throw some rules around and be like, if there's management or if there's auto in the title, then we're going to assume it's a B2B. Otherwise, we assume it's a B2C. We could do that. It might be a little complicated. The phone number is not going to give us any information. The fax isn't going to give us enough because we could assume, hey, if there's a fax number, then it's a B2B account. But then I know that right now we have a little over 1,000 B2B records that are true B2B records, and there's only about 300 records that have the fax number, so we'd miss like 70% of the records, let's say. So that's not a good way to identify it. So when we have these other things, location, obviously all of our locations serve B2B and B2C customers, so that's not going to be a good data point. And we could look at if there is a billing address or if there's not a billing address, then make that assumption. But really, the data point that makes the most sense to look at is this type field. And type, what we've defined, we've looked at the records, and if it's a blue box or red box, it's generally used as a B2B kind of marketing style of account. And otherwise, we have type of other. If it's blank, if the type is customer or the type is prospect, then we can assume that it's a customer account. And the problem that we've been having is with this assumption of if it's a blank account or not, which is like the majority of our records have a blank account type, because when you create a lead and you convert it to an opportunity, it creates the account, but on that screen it doesn't have anywhere for you to choose the type of account that you're working with. And so marketing is really good about keeping up with the red boxes and blue boxes and identifying those, but sales, you've never really had a need to identify this, so you never really look at this data point from what I can tell. But it's a really good data point for me for the data migration. And so we've been having to figure out what to do with these blank values. And so what I found was, I have to figure out, is blank even a good way to assume that if we don't say the type at all, we just assume it's a customer, and we assume it's a B2C account, so that when we're looking at the structure, if I go back over here and we're making that assumption of, is it a B2B or B2C record, we're trying to figure out what it is. And even though they might both be customers, some of them are businesses and some of them are actual customers, and so we have to figure out, do we assume account is the same thing as contact, it's a customer account, a B2C, or do we assume when type is blank that we have this structure of an account and a contact as a B2B? This is where we're having issues. Because what happens is, of all the blank records, I'm going to give you this as an analogy to look at this. So there's about 30 here, but let's say it's representative. So we see like every 3 in 10 of these records, they're different colored, right? And so what I'm trying to represent here is, if I look at the records that have a type of blank, and I'm looking at the 2 data points on here. I'm looking at the name of the account, I'm looking at the name of the contact. And I can use Excel to do an if statement and see if they match. And what I see is that this is going to show you 7 out of 10 records, the account name and the contact name match. They're the same. So what that means to me is these really should be consolidated. 70% of the blank type of accounts are indeed B2C. We can make that assumption. That's a pretty solid assumption, ignoring the 30% for now. That's probably our best lead on how we can do this programmatically, like with code. Like a computer's not going to be able to discern much unless we tell it, right? So then if we dig deeper into these records here, what I'm trying to identify is how much does this hold? Because what I've noticed is a lot of times we'll create the lead and we'll write in the business name or company name or whatever, and we say Lauren Pugh, and then in the first and last name we might spell Pugh differently because we're not sure how it's spelled. So like in the account name we're spelling it P-U-G-H, and in the other field, the last name we're spelling like P-E-W. And so in my Excel file, it told me that every 3 out of 10 records did not match, but they're actually really a person account is what I found for about 2/3 of these records. So what I found was if we could continue to assume that if the account type is blank, that's a good indicator that we can assume that of our choice of being a business account, so that we have an account and contact, or of our choice being a person account, so the account and contact are one and the same, what I see is that's a pretty good rate there, because of the ones that were kind of fuzzy as if they were really telling me any information, a little less than 2/3, so I just filled in 3 of these guys, are going to be labeled as a B2C account, but they're really business guys, like my little business guy there, right? So all that means is that our rate of error is that 7% of our records, our accounts and contacts, are going to be identified through this assumption that we have to make as a B2C record when really they're a B2B record. And so we lose maybe the account name or the billing address or something like that that could potentially be important information. And to kind of throw that in, what does that mean on your day-to-day use, right? Theoretically, 7% of our data would map to about 1 in every 15 accounts that you would open up. You would lose that account name. So you'd see, for my example of New Motion, let's say that this was labeled, the type on the account was labeled blank. So we're assuming that it's a B2C record because we saw that that's true for 93% of the cases, which is a pretty high rate for making an assumption like this. So what would happen is I don't get New Motion in the new system. I just get Sandy and Jim and where they're located, but I don't know that they're attached to New Motion right away. Now we'll have extracts and stuff available for you to identify other things, but you wouldn't necessarily right off the bat know that they were attached to New Motion, which is potentially a problem, right? 1 in 15 records are actually a business account. You don't have the name of the business. That could be a problem. Luckily, for something like New Motion that's marketing on top of keeping track of that type, so that wouldn't be an issue, but it could be an issue. So then the question is, do we let this be? And we're like, you know what, we're okay with a 7% error rate. That's pretty good. Or do we try to resolve that issue a little bit? And that is how we've gotten all the way down from how our current sales force is structured as assuming B2B to how our new sales force lets us assume both. And how do we figure out what that means? How do we utilize that piece, right? And so what we decided today, and dear God, I hope you're following all this. I'm hoping that this is a good with the paper for you, is we decided that, I think we could reduce that 7% a little bit. And he's able to add a filter that is if the name on the account says something like an ampersand or has apostrophe S in it or has auto in the word or wheelchair in the word or something like this in the name, that he's going to actually not assume that they're a B2C and he's going to assume they're B2B. And so we hope that should get about 90% of that 7% would be falsely identified as a customer when really they're an account, to help minimize the disruption in your work if you were to pull up this account and you see what my example earlier was of Sandy and Jem from New Motion, but you don't know that they're from New Motion. So we're trying to minimize that as much as possible so that you have the same exact data. So that's what we've been dealing with this week, and that's just one data point that we've been working on and trying to figure out how to mesh it to the new system. And so if you can wrap your head around that, maybe you can start to understand how this gets very complicated very fast for us to utilize all these promises that the new system has without cleaning up the data and spending a ton of time on making our data right, but trying to work within what the data tells us to figure out how do we map this over so that we can get, instead of 93%, maybe we get 98%. And I'm much more comfortable with a 2% error rate so that means that now instead of 1 in 15 records, you see this error, it's confusing. Now 1 in 50 records, you're seeing this, which is a lot easier for you to deal with on a day-to-day basis, right, than 1 in 15. That's going to creep up pretty annoyingly on you. So we got your back. We're trying to get this going. We appreciate your patience with us. Stay tuned for the fun decisions we make next week. Peace and love, everyone.